I stood in the living room, watching James walk out with his fancy suitcase. His young girlfriend, Sophia, followed closely behind him. The strong scent of her perfume filled the air, mixing with the dinner I had cooked just hours before. The same dinner where my world fell apart. "You're pathetic, Anna," James said coldly, turning back one last time. "No one will believe your crazy accusations. I made sure of that." He tapped his jacket pocket, where his phone held fake messages and proof to make me look unstable. I didn't say a word. After 15 years of marriage, he expected me to cry or beg. But I just sipped my tea, looking at him calmly. "Nothing to say," he mocked. "No more wild ideas about what I've been doing with our money." Sophia giggled and grabbed his arm. "James, baby, let's go. She's not worth it." I set my teacup down. "You're right, James. I have nothing more to say." His face turned red. He hated when I didn't react. He wanted me to be emotional so he could call me crazy. "Good," he snapped. "My lawyer will contact you. Don't expect much. I've covered my tracks." They got into his expensive car and drove away. I waited until the taillights disappeared, then walked straight to his home office. The room smelled like his cologne. His diplomas hung on the wall, showing off his success as a neurosurgeon. I ignored them and went to his desk. The bottom drawer had a hidden compartment. James thought I didn't know about it, but I did. That's where he kept his secret journal. He wrote down everything. Every lie, every stolen dollar, every way he manipulated me. He was so confident that he thought no one would ever catch him. I pulled out the leather-bound book and flipped through the pages. One entry stood out. "Anna's getting suspicious. Told her she's been forgetful. Maybe she needs a doctor." She believed me. So easy to make her doubt herself. I had already seen these pages before. I had copied every single one and sent them to my lawyer. While James was busy making me look crazy, I was quietly collecting proof. Another entry caught my eye. "Sophia is perfect for my plan. She thinks I'll build a life with her after I leave Anna. Poor girl has no clue she's just a pawn. Once I get the hospital board position, I'll need someone better for my image." I closed the journal. James had spent years gaslighting me, convincing me I was wrong about his lies, making me doubt what I saw. But he had made one big mistake. He underestimated me. My phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer, Margaret. "Everything is ready." He accessed the accounts just like we predicted. "Are you ready to proceed?" I looked around the office one last time. Soon, James would try to take money from our joint accounts, only to find them frozen. By morning, the hospital board would see proof of how he stole funds, and Sophia, she would realize James had been lying to her too. "Yes," I texted back. "It's time." I opened the safe behind his expensive painting. Last month, James had changed the lock code, thinking I wouldn't notice. But I had secretly recorded him entering the numbers. Inside the safe were more documents, proof of stolen money, fake hospital records, and secret offshore accounts. For years, James had tried to break me, but every lie only made me stronger. Now I finally had the truth, and I was going to use it. Another text came in, this time from Detective Torres. "Got your evidence. Very thorough. Ready when you are." I smiled. James thought no one would believe me. He was about to find out how wrong he was. I heard cars pull into the driveway. Through the window, I saw Margaret step out of her car, followed by Detective Torres. It was time to show the world who James really was. I gathered the journal and the files, ready to hand them over. James thought he was walking away free, but he had actually left me with everything I needed to take him down. The doorbell rang. It was time to finish this. The next morning, I sat in Margaret's office, watching James's carefully constructed world crumble through a series of increasingly frantic text messages on my phone. "What did you do?" "The accounts are frozen." "Anna, fix this now." "You have no idea what you're doing." Each message grew more desperate than the last. I set my phone aside as Margaret spread the journal's contents across her desk, her experienced eyes scanning each damning page. "This is extraordinary," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Not only did he document the hospital fraud, but he also detailed every step of his plan to discredit you. Most people trying to commit fraud don't create such a thorough record of their crimes." I smiled faintly. James always thought he was the smartest person in the room. He wrote everything down because he never believed anyone would find it, let alone understand the implications. Well, his arrogance is our advantage, Margaret replied, holding up a particularly detailed entry. Look at this. He even recorded the exact amounts he transferred to his offshore accounts. Makes our job much easier. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Sophia. James is freaking out. What's going on? He says you're trying to ruin him. I ignored her message. She'd learn the truth soon enough. Detective Torres entered the office, carrying a thick file. Mrs. Parker, we've verified the offshore account numbers from the journal. Every transaction matches the evidence we gathered. Your husband wasn't just embezzling from your joint accounts, he was stealing from the hospital's research fund. I thought about all the times James had come home late, claiming he was working on crucial research. How many of those nights had he actually spent falsifying records and moving money? What happens next? I asked, my voice steady. The hospital board is reviewing the evidence now, Detective Torres replied. Given the amount of money involved and the detailed nature of your husband's records, they're taking this very seriously. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a news alert, prominent neurosurgeon under investigation for financial fraud. The story was already breaking. Margaret handed me a cup of coffee. Are you ready for phase 2? Once we file these documents with the court, there's no going back. I took a sip, remembering the night 6 months ago when I first discovered the journal. I'd been looking for a missing earring in his office when I found it, hidden away in that false drawer. Reading those pages had been like having every suspicion, every doubt I pushed aside confirmed in black and white. I'm ready, I said firmly. File everything. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Margaret's team worked efficiently, submitting document after document to the courts. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of James' reputation. Around noon, my phone rang. James's mother, Eleanor. Anna dear, her usually imperious voice trembled slightly. Please tell me these horrible stories aren't true. The hospital called James in for an emergency board meeting, and now I'm seeing all these dreadful news reports. Have you asked James about it? I kept my tone neutral. Eleanor had always favored her son, dismissing any suggestion that he might be less than perfect. He's not answering his phone, she admitted. And that girl he's been seeing, Sophia, she's making quite a scene at the hospital, demanding to know what's happening. I almost felt sorry for Sophia, almost. Everything will become clear soon, Eleanor, I said quietly. Just prepare yourself. As I ended the call, Detective Torres returned with an update. Your husband's trying to access the offshore accounts. He's getting desperate. And Sophia left the hospital in tears after security escorted her out. Apparently, she was threatening to expose some of his secrets unless he paid her what he promised. I nodded, unsurprised. Sophia had always struck me as more calculating than the besotted girlfriend she pretended to be. The afternoon brought more developments. The hospital board had suspended James pending investigation. His carefully cultivated reputation was unraveling faster than he could spin new lies. Finally, around 4 o'clock, he appeared at Margaret's office, barging in unannounced. He'd lost his usual polished appearance, his shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. You vindictive witch, he snarled when he saw me. What have you done? I met his gaze calmly. I haven't done anything, James. You did this to yourself. Those journals were private, he shouted. You had no right. To what? I interrupted. To expose your fraud? To prove I wasn't crazy or paranoid? To show everyone exactly who you really are. Margaret stepped forward. Mr. Parker, I suggest you leave now and direct all future communication through your lawyer. James's face contorted with rage. This isn't over, Anna. No one will believe. They already do, I cut in, sliding a copy of the day's news coverage across the table. Your own words, James. Every lie, every manipulation, every crime, all in your own handwriting. He stared at the papers, the color draining from his face as he finally realized the extent of his exposure. His hands shook as he picked up one of the articles. You'll regret this, he threatened, but his voice had lost its power. I stood up, gathering my belongings. No, James. The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. As security escorted him out, I watched through the window as his world continued to collapse. His phone rang incessantly, probably the hospital board. His lawyers, maybe even Sophia, all demanding explanations he couldn't give. Detective Torres appeared at my side. The hospital's pressing charges. With the evidence from the journal and the financial records, he's looking at serious time. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. The man I'd married, the life I thought we had, it had all been a carefully constructed lie. But now finally, the truth was coming out. You did the right thing, Margaret assured me, gathering the documents into a secure file. Phase 2 was complete. Are you ready for what comes next? I took a deep breath. Yes. It's time everyone knew the whole story. The media storm hit harder than I'd expected. By the next morning, James's fall from grace was the leading story in every local paper. Respected surgeon's double life exposed screamed one headline. Hospital fraud scheme uncovered through personal journal declared another. I sat in my kitchen, watching the morning news coverage while Detective Torres updated me on the latest developments. We've frozen all the accounts we could trace, he said, reviewing his notes. But there's still money missing. Around $2 million that we can't locate. I sipped my coffee, remembering a particular journal entry from 3 years ago. Check his mother's beach house in Florida. The entry from March 2021 mentioned a safe behind the master bedroom's wood paneling. Detective Torres raised an eyebrow, impressed. You really did read everything carefully, didn't you? When you spend years being told you're paranoid, you learn to pay attention to details. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. We need to talk. There are things you should know. Before I could respond, another message appeared, this time from James. Meet me. 1 hour. The cafe where we first met. Or I release the videos. I showed the messages to Detective Torres, who immediately started typing on his phone. We'll have plainclothes officers in place. But are you sure you want to do this? I nodded. He's bluffing about the videos. There's an entry in the journal about them. They're fake, staged with Sophia to make me look unstable. He was saving them as insurance. We'll still need to proceed carefully, he warned. An hour later, I walked into the Morning Roast Cafe. James sat at our old table, looking disheveled but still maintaining an air of arrogance. Sophia sat nervously beside him, avoiding my eyes. Anna, he attempted his old, charming smile. Let's be reasonable about this. I sat down across from them, acutely aware of the plainclothes officers scattered throughout the cafe. I'm listening. This can all go away, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. I have videos that show you having mental breakdowns, being violent. If these get out, no one will believe anything you say. Your credibility will be destroyed. Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. You mean the videos you staged? I asked calmly. The ones you detailed in your journal? Including the dates they were filmed, who helped you create them, and how much you paid everyone to participate? James's smile faltered. Sophia's head snapped up. You wrote about those, she asked him, her voice sharp. He wrote about everything, I replied, pulling out copies of specific journal entries, including his plans to discard you once you'd served your purpose. Sophia grabbed the papers, her hands trembling as she read. Her face paled. You said I was special, she whispered to James. You said once the divorce was final. He also wrote about the other women. I added quietly, you weren't the first, and you wouldn't have been the last. James slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Those journals were private. You had no right. Actually, Detective Torres appeared beside our table. Those journals are now evidence in a criminal investigation, along with the videos you just attempted to use for blackmail. I watched as the last traces of color drained from James's face. Sophia stood up abruptly, grabbing her designer bag. I don't want any part of this, she announced. And James, check your phone. I just sent some interesting screenshots to the detective here. Turns out I can keep records too. She stormed out, leaving James staring after her in shock. It's over, I said softly. The board has the evidence of your embezzlement. The police have proof of your fraud. Everyone knows the truth now. You've ruined everything, he hissed. No, James, you did that yourself. Every time you wrote in that journal, every time you convinced yourself you were too clever to get caught, you were building the case against yourself. Detective Torres placed a hand on James's shoulder. Mr. Parker, we need you to come with us. We have some questions about the money hidden in your mother's beach house. As they led James away, I remained at the table, looking around the cafe where our story had begun 15 years ago. Back then, I thought I found someone who valued and respected me. Instead, I'd married a man who spent years trying to make me doubt my own sanity. My phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. Hospital board meeting tomorrow. They want you to testify. I typed a quick reply. I'll be there. Tomorrow I would tell my story, not as the unstable woman James had tried to paint me as, but as someone who had found the strength to expose the truth. And I had his own words to back me up, every step of the way. The journal that was meant to document his triumph had become the instrument of his downfall, and there was a certain poetry in that. The hospital board meeting was held in a stark conference room, its walls lined with awards and accolades, many of them bearing James's name. As I prepared to testify, I watched them take down his framed achievements one by one. Mrs. Parker, the board chairman began, we've reviewed the evidence you provided, but we'd like to hear from you directly about what you discovered. I opened the journal to the first flagged page. It started 3 years ago. James began documenting discrepancies in the research fund accounts. At first, small amounts, 10,000 here, 20,000 there. But it grew. The board members listened intently as I walked them through James's detailed records of his fraud. Every transaction, every falsified research report, every manipulated budget, all meticulously documented in his own handwriting. The total amount, I concluded, comes to just over $4 million. Most of it has been recovered from various accounts, including the safe in his mother's beach house. The chairman removed his glasses, rubbing his temples. And the personal elements, the attempts to discredit you? I shared the entries where James had plotted to make me appear unstable, his strategies for gaslighting me, his plans for using Sophia to create evidence of my supposed mental instability. When I finished, the room was silent. Finally, the chairman spoke. Mrs. Parker, we owe you an apology. Many of us witnessed James' attempts to question your stability, and we did nothing. You weren't the only ones, I replied quietly. He was very convincing. After the meeting, I found Sophia waiting outside. She looked different, younger somehow, without her usual perfect makeup and designer clothes. I'm sorry, she said simply. I didn't know about any of it. I thought. She trailed off. You thought you were special. I finished for her. That's what he wanted you to believe. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I've told the police everything. About the staged videos, the promises he made, how he coached me to act around you. Thank you, I said. That will help their case. As I walked to my car, Margaret called with an update. James took a plea deal. 8 years, plus full restitution. His medical license is being revoked. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. And the divorce? Given the evidence of fraud and his criminal conviction, you'll get everything you're entitled to. He won't be able to touch your assets or contest the settlement. That evening, I returned to our house, my house now, and began packing up James's remaining belongings. In his office, I found more journals, older ones dating back to the beginning of our marriage. Reading them was like watching someone slowly transform into a monster page by page. The early entries showed ambition tinged with arrogance. Over time, that arrogance grew into something darker, more calculating. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor, James's mother. I found more documents in the beach house safe. I'm giving everything to Detective Torres. I'm so sorry, Anna. I should have seen who he really was. I set the phone down and continued packing, coming across photos from happier times, our wedding, vacations, hospital galas. In each one, I could now see what I'd missed. The calculated look in James's eyes, the way he positioned himself to be the center of attention, how I seemed to fade into the background. But I wasn't that person anymore. 6 months later, I stood in the newly renovated living room of my house. Gone were the pretentious artworks James had insisted on, replaced by pieces that brought me joy. His dark leather furniture had been exchanged for comfortable, bright pieces that made the space feel like home. Detective Torres had become a friend, stopping by occasionally to update me on the case's final details. The last of the money has been recovered, he told me during one visit. The hospital's research fund has been fully restored. And James, I asked, adapting poorly to prison life, from what I hear, keeps insisting everyone's conspiring against him. I thought about the journal that had started it all, now safely stored as evidence. He never understood that his biggest enemy was himself. Margaret called with one final piece of news. The divorce is official. You're free. Free, the word echoed in my mind as I looked around my home. Free from the gaslighting, the manipulation, the constant self-doubt. Free to be myself again. I'd started volunteering at a support group for victims of psychological abuse, sharing my story to help others recognize the signs I'd missed for so long. Some of the women there had similar stories of manipulation, of carefully documented lies, of the strength it took to break free. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. Testified against James today. Thought you should know, he still doesn't get it. Still thinks he's the victim. Thank you for showing me the truth. I smiled, remembering James's sneering words that night. No one will ever believe your stories. But they had believed, because in the end it wasn't just my word against his. It was his own words, his own detailed records of his crimes that had revealed the truth. I walked to my bedroom window, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The journal that James had kept as a trophy of his cleverness had become the key to my freedom. Sometimes I realized the truth has a way of coming out, one page at a time. Time to write my own story, I whispered to myself and opened my laptop to begin.